Hello, everyone, and welcome to the NeoSystems CMMC Town Hall. Now I'd like to introduce your host, Ed Bassett from NeoSystems. Ed?
Thanks, Don, and welcome everyone to our continuing series of Town Hall Ask Me Anything sessions on cybersecurity maturity model certification. My guest today is Nick Andersen. I do want to mention that we are recording these sessions as part of our community outreach to the Defense Industrial Base. Our focus at NeoSystems as a managed service provider is on organizations that are seeking certification under CMMC, and that's primarily who we have in our audience today. If you do have some questions from the audience, please send those in on the Q&A feature within Zoom, and I will tee up as many of those questions as I can for Nick in our discussion today. I'll start with the introduction of Nick Andersen. He's the CISO of Public Sector at Lumen Technologies. He's also a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, and he builds upon a career with service in the government at DOE, DHS, the White House, Navy, Coast Guard, Marine Corps. He's held federal agency level CIO roles, state CISO in my home state of Vermont, senior industry executive and advisory board positions. So pretty broad background. Nick, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
So Nick, you've got a lot of experience on both the government and industry side of things. As you've watched CMMC emerge from the DoD over the last couple of years and participated now in the industry response as a CISO, do you think we're getting it right?
Well, I mean, I think that the specific requirements and even the implementation path can be tweaked, but I mean, the bottom line is we have to do something here. I mean, I think we all agree that most major exploitations by adversaries that are seeking to undermine our strategic advantage involve some sort of targeting of the defense industrial base. We have to evolve from safeguarding information and safeguarding information systems to safeguarding operations and safeguarding enterprise capabilities, and certainly take that broader look and that broader approach. Now, like I said, you can debate individual nits of implementation just like anyone does with any major program, but at the end of the day, and those things are consequential. Like they're not unimportant, but at the end of the day, this is really about the special trust and responsibility that we all have to safeguard these programs where we're trusted partners.
So let me ask about effectiveness. So CMMC is motivating companies to implement a pretty broad catalog of cyber hygiene practices, right? It covers all the key bases, especially if you get to level 3 or higher. In your opinion, do these get the job done? And I ask that in the sense of, if all the contractors towed the line, does it work? Are we significantly more resilient to the actual threats that we're facing out there?
Well, I think if we can get everybody to a common level of understanding and to kind of a common book of practice for what we're actually trying to achieve, then yeah, I think if the question is, will we be more resilient? Yes, I certainly think so. It's going to raise the high water mark, for the industry as a whole. But understanding maturity of practice becomes important as we continue to see how quickly the cyber threat landscape is evolving. So we can't look at this as a static one-time thing. This has become like a maturity program of practice to invest in reducing our cyber risk over the long term.
So let me follow up with that maturity of practice comment a little bit, because CMMC really brings that to the forefront in a formal way. Before, it hasn't been before, right? There was standards out there, do the things the standard says, but CMMC is looking for people to bake that in. I think there are people, at least my observation is that some people have really kind of, initially thought of CMMC as yet another bolt on. We're going to bolt some security on and raise the bar here and there, and it's going to do it. But I think it's more fundamental than that. I think it's asking people to think about it differently. And I take some of that from your comment about maturity of practice. So can you give a little more, what do you think the impact of that is on people from where they are today to where they would need to go to demonstrate maturity of practice?
Well, I think you're right. I think we've been asked in the past to simply, comply. It's been, here is your list of requirements. Please go do these things, satisfy a checklist, and maybe that checklist involves someone else coming and looking over your shoulder and saying, yes, you did, or just knowing that you could be audited. And this is with anything. I mean, this is with whether it's DCAA that's coming in and looking at contract audits, or now we're talking about CMMC and audits and assessments related to that. Really though, with maturity, what I think is we're trying to get beyond the checklist. We're trying to say, for our defense industrial base and for a lot of other elements of the government to come, we have to expect more. We've seen major breach after major breach after major breach, whether it's with large corporations or with specific defense programs. And so we have to really get more holistic on how we're thinking about security as a practice. Our adversaries are strategically challenging us in cyberspace. We have to make sure that we are making the investments to be able to strategically challenge them back.
So let me ask about what you're doing at Lumen specifically around CMMC and the impact that it's had on things there. You came into Lumen in the middle of CMMC, right? So after it had already kind of been released and everybody's thinking about it. How does it factor into your priorities, and how do you address it, given that you're a global company with a global infrastructure?
Well, yeah, you hit the nail on the head. So Lumen is a global company. We've got 450,000 route miles of fiber in 60 plus countries around the world. So this is just a monstrous global enterprise. We're the world's largest internet service provider with one of the most deeply peered, internet backbones available. So for us, the large impact has been making sure that we clearly identify the scope and the boundary of what we're looking at against our global footprint, and making sure that we're tackling those issues that we know our customers are focused on. And that's I think a difference, between us and some others in the industrial base, is that we really have to look very tightly at the kind of the scoping and the boundary to make sure that we're focusing our efforts on what our U.S. government partners really want us to achieve.
So, as an ISP, you're a chunk of the public internet. CUI, by CMMC requirements and prior requirements, has to be encrypted when it's transited across those networks. So, where do you have CUI? Obviously, all that encrypted CUI, you don't know and you don't need to know, right? Because it's encrypted before it gets to you. So where are you guys handling CUI and what seems to be in that boundary?
Yeah, so we're not even just taking a look at the explicit CUI. We're also trying to go a step further and look at the aggregation of information that we have and how that comes together and could form CUI, or could form points of strategic interest to malicious cyber threat actors within this space. So for us, we're not even just focusing the conversation on the explicit CUI and being able to meet that target. We're trying to make sure that we're meeting the spirit and the intent of what CMMC is trying to accomplish as well, by looking at that. Because you're right, encryption is a great example there, and being able to hit the FIPS requirements that are outlined there. But for us, we've got information and infrastructure all over the world. Being able to make sure we can clearly articulate and clearly represent where is government data going, how is it getting there, is really important to us.
So, there's been this sort of swarm of swarm. Maybe it's only a handful, but they're big. There's been this pattern of, I'll call them utility attacks, but SolarWinds, Microsoft, right? These are attacks where the attacker clearly believes that by going after a target that's wide and ubiquitously used, they can get to a lot of data with a single successful attack. You guys got to feel like you're on that list, right? A successful attack against your infrastructure could have very big benefit to an adversary, in the sense that you're ubiquitous, right? You're the largest ISP in the world.
Yep, absolutely. So we know that we're one of those major targets, along with a couple of others in the telecommunications and technology industry as well. We're kind of building up from that foundation that we've had for years of being, we're nearly 100-year-old company, building up from that foundation of the network infrastructure and moving up the stack. And we know that the data that we hold and the services that we provide just become more and more valuable as we continue to move up the stack and provide even more on top of that that rich network foundation that we've had for so long. I absolutely agree with you. We would be a major target. just like all these others that we've seen, whether it's been hitting solar winds and kind of introducing themselves as a malicious actor within that element of the supply chain, whether it's hitting Microsoft or whether it's going after other critical infrastructure sectors, because DHS outlines, from the Obama era executive order and how we've outlined everything in presidential policy directives 21 and 41. They kind of outline those critical infrastructure sectors, but we're continuing to see those attacks against critical infrastructure today. Even just this, this last week, we saw, the attacks on, agriculture and food supply, with the new co-op, attack that we saw out west, and hitting their infrastructure, and that's affecting not only their ability to help conduct operations to meet their needs of the food supply chain, but it's affecting their intellectual property as well, and the services and the technology that they provide as a value add.
Well, the other big target specifically for ransomware attacks, but I think other espionage, more espionage attacks is service providers, which makes me nervous because we are one, but you guys are too. So beyond your own infrastructure, you're providing managed services to other people, IT services, security services as a managed service provider. How does CMMC impact those services and how you protect other people's systems?
I mean, we have more than, even beyond just CMMC, we have more than 30 different US and international compliance and regulatory frameworks that we have to manage. And that falls to one of my teams, excuse me, that's exclusively focused on that compliance activity. The scope and scale of CMMC is broad, as is our reach across our public sector business and what we're doing. So just making sure that we've fully educated our teams on what we need to be doing has been interesting.
So you're educating your teams. Do you find yourself educating customers, subcontractors, others beyond your boundaries?
Oh, I mean, it's the entire ecosystem for us, and that's what we take with all, whether it's a product or a service that we're providing. It doesn't matter if it's cloud or SD-WAN, SASE, network services, cybersecurity managed services, and SOC takeover, whatever it might be. Yeah, we're absolutely having to engage in educating the ecosystem, and some of that's educating customers as well. We have a huge reach and a lot of data that's available to us. So we try to use that as an opportunity to educate customers about threat over the horizon before it begins to impact them. And some of that as well is educating our supply chain and our vendors and those that we're bringing in on this work with us.
So as you're talking to those folks, it's a bunch, right? Internal people, customers, suppliers. What are you seeing in terms of the challenges? Like, what are the tough nuts here? So the obvious issue people like to talk about is cost, especially small businesses say, hey, this is hard for us, right? It's a cost we haven't had to bear before, and it seems like the bar is fairly high. Beyond cost, what are the stumbling blocks that you're seeing that are tripping people up?
Yeah, so if we're putting aside cost for a moment, which is
I didn't mean to put it totally aside, sorry.
Yeah, which is a big one. So if we're putting cost totally off to the side, which is huge. I'd say two things. One, we recognize that for us, we're not only just a core member of the defense industrial base, but of the larger critical infrastructure community, providing these lifelines to communities around the world. So we have to understand that, and cybersecurity has to be core to that mission. But we just have a ton of data to review when it comes to understanding good versus bad behavior in this global landscape. So we talk about challenges. Like, we ingest 195 billion net flow sessions daily and more than 1 billion DNS queries. So that's a huge data problem for us, where we know that both it's an opportunity and it's an incredible responsibility, because we want to be able to, like I said, key people in on what are the risks, what are the threats that we're seeing emerge elsewhere, where we know that bad actors may be using certain elements of their neighboring environments as testing and training grounds, proving grounds, before turning their attention to more rich targets like those within the defense industrial base. And the second is making sure that we're rapidly putting out new solutions and products to meet that evolving demand, in particular within public sector, to protect the mission and serve that mission and ensure the safety of the sensitive information that's at hand. Those are two big challenges for us all around just that rapidly evolving threat environment.
So, I mean, as an industry innovator, right? How do we solve this? You mentioned bringing out new services or changes to your services that are going to be better from a security perspective, more compliant, more effective in security. What does that look like? I mean, are you fundamentally changing offerings? Are you tweaking them? Like what is, as a consumer, what will we see different as a result of some of these things?
Well, I mean, for us, and it's going to sound trite, but it really is about baking security into everything we do, which sounds an awful lot like a bumper sticker that everybody would like to be able to use. Yeah, we bake security in everything we do. We're not going to throw anything out there that's insecure or crappy product or solution, but really, it really is core and fundamental to what we do. So I've been amazed. So like you mentioned, I came in the middle of the CMMC journey for Lumen. I've been here, a little more than 6 months, but less than 12. I'm really amazed by the level of commitment that our executive leadership team has to ensuring that we're taking cybersecurity into account at every step along the way. Whether that's a new product that's going to go to market, whether it's a new service that we're offering, whether it's a change that we're making internally, whether it's weighing, the value of business case, developments internally, whatever it is, security is core and fundamental. And as industry innovators, I think that's important for us to take into account for how we solve these challenges. Is we have to make sure that we're putting cybersecurity and the security and resiliency of our customers first and foremost in everything that we're doing, and then build out from there.
One of the things that I've seen, and we talked with some other industry innovators, right, about is the complexity on the consumer end, right? When people buy services, sometimes it's very difficult to consume those services in a secure way. And I've talked about this with Microsoft, right? They sell Microsoft 365 and they put a huge commitment behind CMMC with a placemat, and it's got 1,000 things on it that knobs you can turn and things you can do within their consoles to harden it and configure it in a secure way. But it's also very possible to use it in a tremendously insecure way. So for unsophisticated consumer, it's easy for them to make the wrong choice. It takes quite an investment to manage it correctly. Is that something? I mean, I don't know. Your services are different, I think, than than say Microsoft, right? Are you in any way sort of changing your services to make it easier for consumers to use them in a secure way and harder for them to make a grievous error?
Yeah, we absolutely are. So any offering that we have, any partner that we introduce into the ecosystem, we're making sure that we explain to people how the digital transformation journey and the citizen experience journey that they're on is never something that should be decoupled from the security journey that they're on, and they should be complementary to each other. They shouldn't be a digital transformation conversation and separate track security modernization conversation, because a lot of times they go together, especially when we talk about, one of the larger threat vectors within public sector is, just the large amount of legacy programs, systems, and technical debt that we have that introduces risk in these environments. So digital transformation conversations can be security conversations. So yeah, it's absolutely integrated, and it has to be simple to understand and simple to use. Nobody wants the Rube Goldberg machine of security, where it's you see all the different 1,000 different knobs and all the different pieces that come together, and it doesn't really look like it accomplishes a whole lot, but it really looks fancy when you're thinking about your security approach. We have to make it easy for people.
Agree, and that's something, I mean, that has been kind of foremost in our agenda is making it easy for people who don't have access to sort of sophisticated security talent on their staff, right? The big companies do, the small companies don't, and that's just a general observation across the div. So you mentioned supply chain and keeping track of that supply chain. Do you have concerns about stragglers within the supply chain? I mean, in terms of the folks that are going to interact and engage on this are the early adopters, the people who see this as a way to maybe impress you as they're in their role in your supply chain. But there's also going to be those who sort of hide behind the bushes and are straggling. Do you see impacts of poor 800-171 compliance score or missing CMMC certification as we get to that? down in the supply chain and what kind of impacts that might have on you and your services at Lumen. I mean, I guess my question is, are you actively tracking and managing that, and what do you think those risks look like?
Yeah, I mean, we have an enormous supply chain, so it's absolutely a concern for us. We have to mitigate the risk of those potentially non-compliant entities by introducing diversity within the supply chain right now. Not something that we do later, not something once a rule is finalized, not something once assessors are rolling through and people are starting to get their certificates. We have to do it right now before it becomes an issue, before it impacts our ability to deliver. So how we are approaching some of that is, we're really maturing our vendor risk management approach internally. And all that starts with upfront screenings, follow-on conversations, identifying sort of higher priority vendors than others for us to work with upfront, and continually assessing our risk within the extended supply chain. On the flip side, we want to make sure that we are also a good partner, and that we are also able to represent our own security, and that we're also able to represent to other people in the DIB how consuming our services and how partnering with us helps to raise the collective level of security that you are able to represent within your programs and within your offerings. So it cuts both ways. But yeah, it's absolutely, I think, a concern within the extended supply chain.
Do you find yourself helping some of those companies that may be struggling to figure this out?
I think that for the people that are our vendors and our suppliers, I think we're certainly asking questions of them and kind of probing them in ways to be able to make them aware of the risk and of how we're thinking about threats, and kind of poking them along. Say, here are some of the things that are a concern to us based on kind of your placement within our supply chain. How are you mitigating these risks? How are you thinking about this? And for the ones that we are providing services to within the DIB, we're always having those kind of extended conversations with them to help illustrate to them how we're incorporating security into everything that we do.
I really like the emphasis on the right now. And I think that because these are long lead time things, right? I think CMMC in particular is not something you can do by cramming for the test over a few weekends, right? You just can't get there. And it's because of maturity of practice that you mentioned earlier. So I think the fact that I'm hearing this from not just you, but from a lot of the larger prime contractors, that have thousands of people in their supply chain, as I'm sure you do, that they're creating a big sense of urgency because, CMMC is pass fail, but your situation is not. You can go to your suppliers and say, yeah, we're going to encourage you to move down this path, but we're going to expect to see results. Because if CMMC rolled out tomorrow, a lot of people would fail it and be unable to pass. And that's just the reality of the situation. So I'm definitely glad to see that coming from yourself and the bigger primes. So kind of a little bit of a detour. You've been in a lot of different government agencies before joining Lumen. So there's been some talk about CMMC as something that could be adopted across federal agencies besides the DoD. I think there's a lot of benefit of that personally, because I think no contractor wants to meet different standards for every customer that they have. They certainly like to do it one time, do it well, and be good to go. Is that something that you've run into, for instance, when you were at DOE or prior positions?
So I don't know, it's something that I've encountered elsewhere, and specifically within places like DOE, it wasn't something that we had yet. And I can tell you that it was one of the more exciting things for me as someone who geeks out on federal policy stuff to see outlined in the executive order was that reconciliation of cybersecurity requirements across departments and agencies, just because I think it's going to make it a lot easier for the federal government to get insight into supply chain risk. I think it's going to be a lot easier on the industrial based side to be able to comply and to be able to meet that standard and understand that the standard I need to meet for DoD and the standard that I need to meet for Department of Interior, are going to be roughly the same. The contract might require certification at a different level for a different type of service, certainly, but the overarching requirement is going to be similar. Now, I think we've seen agencies start to publicly sort of make their comments, so we know this is coming. DHS went so far as to put in the Federal Register to say this was something they're thinking about and something they're considering for the future. Now, while we didn't have a CMMC-like program at DOE, within my office, the Cybersecurity, Energy Security, and Emergency Response, or CSER office at DOE, we did have the Cybersecurity Capability Maturity Model, or C2M2, that we sponsored within DOE. Now, C2M2 was more focused on the energy sector, whether it was oil and natural gas or the electricity subsector. The C2M2 is more focused on helping organizations, whatever sector they were in, whatever type they were, whatever size they were, to evaluate and make improvements to their cybersecurity programs, strengthen their operational resilience. And the nuance we were trying to hit there, again, was operational resilience. We know that an adversary, if they're well-resourced enough, if they're determined enough, is going to find a way. So we need to make sure that we have the longer-term resilience baked in there. And in particular, within the energy sector, we were focused not only on the IT, but on the OT, on the operational technology assets as well, and the cybersecurity practices that we wanted to see baked in to achieve that resilience within the environment.
Very cool. So take my head out of the CMMC book for a moment. CMMC is just one piece of sort of larger cybersecurity picture. We're seeing initiatives around software development, supply chain security, zero trust, a host of things that have been getting in the news lately. What else has a place sort of high up on your priority list as a CISO besides this maturity or practice focus that we've talked about?
I mean, all of the above there are important, but I can tell you the first elements that we've started to tackle within our own supply chain are that vendor risk management approach that I mentioned before. We've worked on not only our own zero trust implementation and our own zero trust journey, but also how we assess public sector customers along that journey. So out of all those things, those are two that we were hitting early and hitting often, and really helping not only to sell into government as part of the industrial base, but also how to implement it in our own environment as a Fortune 200, to be able to demonstrate how we could do it successfully and be able to build that maturity and that knowledge internally to support those types of things.
So you mentioned the executive order that the Biden administration put out this year. One of the things in there that struck me was they emphasized the need for sharing and transparency, situational awareness, and getting threat and experiential data, response data too, between government and industry. And I think as we watched SolarWinds, it became very apparent how important that is, right? FireEye was good at detecting, and they were very transparent about sharing information that helped us respond in a much different way than I think we would have responded had that transparency not been done on the part of a private company. I'm assuming with the broad reach that you have at Lumen, any initiatives around that kind of public-private sharing, you'd be right in the middle of. How do we incentivize and enable this in a way that industry, private companies, public companies are going to embrace?
Yeah, I think we have to identify the right structural changes to institutionalize information sharing. And then, moving beyond just sharing of indicators of compromise, one way. I think that we have to make it about a substantive exchange with the information that we're receiving from government as well. Because, having been on both sides, government sharing cyber threat information to industry and industry trying to receive information, we really have to focus on making sure that it's a true substantive exchange and that we're encouraging that information sharing. So like I said, there's lots of structural elements we need to get in place there. Technical means to be able to support it, liability protection for companies that want to share it, and acting in good faith to exchange information, not making it just a one-way, hey, give your information to the government, making it a substantive exchange where there's a real partnership that's developed there.
Yeah, that's something I very much look forward to seeing how that will flesh out. I think it's really critical because the attacks are now just a broad scale, and their time to respond is getting really short. So we've got to find ways to do that in a very, very fast way. So yeah, good. Well, Nick, we're kind of at the end of our time. I just have one kind of wrap-up question I'll ask you today. And that is kind of something actionable, right? One piece of advice you have for the cybersecurity decision makers that are on the program here today. One of the risks we face is indecision, and we've seen sort of some fence sitting going on lately. Change of administration, CMMC's under review. People are using that as an excuse to park on the fence. And that it could be almost as bad as making a poor decision and going down the wrong path. In your opinion, how do we clear out some of that clutter and move forward? And where should people focus their attention right now today?
I think my piece of advice would be not to focus on the solutions first and not to focus on the widget that you think you're going to buy to solve a problem, but really focus on the risk. What are you trying to solve for? Who can you speak to who has solved it before? How can you benefit from those lessons learned? And who can you really partner with? I think strategic partnerships, both inside of industry and government and industry together, are really going to be able to provide a lot of benefit for folks that are thinking about how do they move forward, making some of these really important decisions for their companies. That's why we're so excited about initiatives that we're a part of, as part of this founding group with CISO for the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative Initiative. That's bringing together public and private sector entities to unify deliberative and crisis action planning for defensive cybersecurity plans and detecting and mitigating the risk of malicious cyber activity, both within the government and within critical infrastructure. So focusing on what you're actually trying to solve for and developing those relationships that can really be built upon to help manage that risk down. That's the most important thing in my mind.
Good advice. Thanks very much. Appreciate your time today, Nick. Audience, thanks for your time and attention. I do want to mention two upcoming events that we have. Both are events that NeoSystems is sponsoring. First is a CMMC boot camp. That's going to be September 29th, in person or virtual. And that other one is Uniting Women in Cyber, UWIC. That's October 5th and 6th. That is a fully virtual event. We do have a discount code available. It's a Cyber Guild event, which we are sponsoring. So please check out those two. We are not going to be having the CMMC Town Hall next Wednesday because that's the same day as the CMMC Boot Camp, and we're going to be participating in that. So we will not have a session next week of this series, but we will return on October 6th at our regular time of 1 p.m. Eastern. So for information on the boot camp, Uniting Women in Cyber, and future Town Hall series, please go to our website if you're not getting our emails. It's neosystemscorp.com for those details. Thanks very much, everyone.